Vrethkai did not sleep. His species had not slept in the way most beings understood sleep for roughly 4,000 years of their evolution. What he did instead was stand in his archive room with the lights low and let his mind move through information the way water moves through rock, slowly, patiently, finding every crack. He stood like that for 1 hour after leaving the reception. Then he opened the archive. The Galactic Council's record system was the oldest continuously running database in known space. It held 600 years of formal diplomatic records, and behind those, another 2,000 years of recovered and cross-referenced fragments from species who had come before. It was not perfect. No archive of that age was. But it was thorough in the way that only something very old and very careful could be thorough. Vrethkai began with designation Solari 3. The designation was clean. 11 years of human diplomatic contact, neatly filed. Biological surveys, atmospheric data, first contact protocol records, trade framework proposals. Nothing alarming. Nothing unusual. A peripheral system, Class C biosphere, 1 inhabited planet, 1 spacefaring species at early developmental stage. He stared at the clean file for a moment. Then he searched for Earth. The system returned 14 entries. He had not expected that. He had expected 0. He sat down. The oldest entry was 60,000 years old. It came from a species called the Maravan. They were not in the Council anymore. They were not anywhere anymore. What remained of them was a few hundred recovered documents and the archaeological remnants of 3 colony worlds, which were now quiet and covered in whatever plants had decided to grow there in the intervening millennia. He opened the Maravan entry. It was a probe report. Standard survey mission, Solari system, logged 60,000 years prior. The probe had entered the system, conducted its measurements, and returned. Clean. Unremarkable. The Maravan had noted the third planet as a biosphere of significant density and filed it for future review. Then, 18 years after the probe report, there was a second entry. An expedition. A full crewed mission. 7 vessels by the Maravan counting system. They had gone to Solari 3 for a closer survey. There was no return report. Vrethkai read the file again to make sure he had not misread it. He had not. 7 vessels had gone to the third planet of the Solari system. None of them came back. The final Maravan entry in the Solari records was a warning beacon, filed at a relay station 40 light-years from the system. It was short. Most warning beacons were. In the Maravan language, the key word in the message translated into something that no clean English equivalent existed for. The closest rendering was, the ground that eats. They had named Solari 3 after what it did to things that came near it. He sat with that for a while. Then he opened the other 13 entries. Not all of them were as old as the Maravan record. Not all of them were from extinct species. 3 were from species still active in the Council, though none of them had sent anyone to the Solari system in living memory. In each case the pattern held the same basic shape. Curiosity. Approach. Silence. And then, where a follow-up record existed at all, a name. A different name in a different language, but always the same meaning underneath it. The place where things end. The world that breaks what enters it. The system you do not return from. One translation was more specific than the others. It came from a species called the Dreth, who were still alive and were, at this moment, 2 corridors away on Vethra platform attending a trade summit. The Dreth had sent an unmanned observation platform near Solari 3 roughly 12,000 years ago. The platform had survived long enough to send 1 transmission before going dark. In Dreth, the name they had given the planet translated as, the world that survived everything and named itself after the dirt that swallowed it. Vrethkai read that line 4 times. He thought about Dana Holt at the reception, explaining the etymology of the word Earth with the easy cheerfulness of someone who had no idea she was describing a war record. Old English. Proto-Germanic. The ground. The soil. The material under your feet. The humans had named their planet after the ground. After the dirt. After the most ordinary, unremarkable thing in their entire world. He thought about what that said about the people who had named it. He closed the archive files. He opened a new message and sent it to the 4 other members of the Council's inner session. He used the flag that meant urgent but not emergency, because he was a careful being and he did not want to cause a panic. He asked them to meet him in the closed session room in 2 hours. He said only that he had found something in the archive that required their immediate attention. He did not say what. Then he straightened his 6 limbs, adjusted the formal wrap he still wore from the reception, and walked to the session room to wait. Cole Navarro was asleep by then, which was something his species did with remarkable efficiency. In the years he had served in the Navy, he had learned to sleep anywhere, in any conditions, for whatever amount of time was available, and to wake from that sleep alert and functional. He was doing that now in the human delegation's assigned quarters, which were comfortable in a way that suggested the council had researched human comfort requirements carefully. Owen Briggs was not asleep. Owen was sitting in the small common area of the delegation's quarters with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching the corridor through the half-open door. He was not doing this for any specific reason he could have named. He was doing it because he had been in enough places where the shape of a corridor in the middle of the night told you more than any briefing document could, and this corridor was doing something interesting. It was busy. Not loudly busy. Not alarmingly busy. But for the middle of the station's sleep cycle, a significant number of very senior beings were moving through a corridor that connected the general quarters to the closed session rooms, and they were all moving with the particular walk of people who had been woken up and told to come quickly. Owen counted 7 over the course of 40 minutes. He thought about waking Cole. He decided not to. Cole needed sleep and there was nothing concrete to report, and Owen was a precise enough man to know the difference between a feeling and a fact. What he had was a feeling. The fact would come later. He picked up his cold coffee. He took a sip. He kept watching. Lily Farrow was also awake. She was sitting on the floor of her quarters with her back against the bed frame and her paper notebook on her knees, and she was reading what she had written at the reception. 2 words, underlined. She looked at them for a long time. Then she wrote a 3rd word underneath them and put the notebook away. She did not sleep either. By morning, Vrethkai had finished his presentation. It was careful and thorough and laid out in the precise sequential logic that the inner council preferred. He had not slept. He had not needed to. He had what he needed. The 5 members of the inner session had listened without interrupting, which was itself unusual. Normally they interrupted constantly. That was how their deliberations worked. This time they did not. When he finished, one of them asked a single question. She asked whether the human delegation had been informed. Vrethkai said no. Nobody suggested that they should be. Not yet. The station continued its rotation. The stars stayed where they were. In the human delegation's quarters, Cole Navarro woke up, made himself coffee, and stood by the window looking out at space with the expression of a man who had learned, over many years, that the quiet moments were usually the ones worth paying attention to. He drank his coffee. He waited to see what the morning would bring. Fear does not stay in rooms. That is the one thing about fear that every species in the galaxy had in common: it could not be filed, classified, or contained. It moved the way rumors moved, which is to say it moved the way water moves downhill. Always finding the path. Always arriving somewhere lower. Someone in the inner session told someone outside it. Nobody admitted to this later. Nobody was asked directly. The council was very good at not asking questions whose answers would create more problems than the questions themselves. By morning, 6 species had quietly begun repositioning their nearest vessels. Not dramatically. Nothing that looked like a military movement. Small adjustments. A patrol route extended slightly further from the Solari system. A trade vessel scheduled stop cancelled for unspecified logistical reasons. A survey ship recalled to its home station for routine maintenance that had not been scheduled the day before. Cole Navarro would not have noticed any of this on his own. He was not a man who tracked fleet movements as a hobby, and the Council's general network did not broadcast that kind of information in a format he had access to. What he did notice, because it was his job to notice such things, was that the morning briefing from the Council's diplomatic office was 40 minutes late. He drank a second cup of coffee. Dana Holt noticed different things. She noticed that the Threni ambassador who had stopped to talk to her twice in the past 3 days now took a different corridor when he saw her coming. She noticed this the first time and thought nothing of it. She noticed it the second time and started paying attention. She also noticed that the small vendor station near the human delegation's quarter, which had been reliably stocked with the particular type of processed food that humans found acceptable, had not been restocked that morning and showed no sign of being restocked. She wrote these things in her own notebook. Not a paper one, like Lily's. A small digital one she kept in her jacket pocket. The pale chorus was the thing that changed the shape of the morning. The pale chorus were a species unlike most others on the station. They were not one being or a collection of individual beings. They were a collective, thousands of distributed bodies operating from a single shared consciousness, present on Vethra platform as a courtesy delegation of 12 physical forms that were, in effect, one mind walking around in 12 sets of clothes. They had been members of the Galactic Council for longer than most current member species had achieved space travel. At 9:40 in the station morning, all 12 of their physical forms went silent simultaneously. This had never happened before. The records Vrethkai could have cited, had anyone thought to check, did not contain a single instance of the pale chorus going fully silent during an active diplomatic session. They spoke constantly, overlapping, harmonizing, their voices running together the way streams run together before a river. The sound of them was one of the background constants of Vethra platform, the way the ventilation hum was constant, the way the light from the observation windows was constant. Then it was not there. It lasted 11 hours. Owen Briggs was the one who noticed first, because Owen Briggs had been cataloging background sounds since his third day on the station. Not deliberately. It was just how his mind worked, the way some people unconsciously count stairs or clock exits. He heard the pale chorus go quiet from 2 corridors away and he stopped walking and stood still for a moment, the way an animal stops when a sound in the forest suddenly ceases. He went back to the delegation's common room and told Cole. Cole set down his coffee. How long? Cole asked. Just happened, Owen said. They waited. The pale chorus stayed quiet for 11 hours. When they resumed speaking, the 12 physical forms gathered their things in the chorus's carefully slow and deliberate way and requested immediate repatriation to their home system. The request went through official council channels, formatted correctly, worded politely. It gave no reason. No species in the council was required to give a reason for ending a diplomatic visit early. The protocols had been designed that way on purpose, for the species that found reasons difficult to articulate without causing offense. The council approved the request without comment. The pale chorus left. Dana had been tracking all of this in her digital notebook. She had 9 entries by early afternoon, small things individually, the kind of things that got dismissed as coincidence when you only looked at one at a time. Together they had a shape. She knew what shapes like that meant. She had spent enough time studying how species communicated the things they did not want to say directly. She brought the notebook to Cole. He read it once. He read it again, slower. Son of a gun, he said, which was what he said when things were moving faster than he had budgeted for. Owen was leaning against the wall nearby, arms crossed. It started after the reception, he said. Something at the reception. Dana nodded. I've been going back through every conversation I had. The only thing that was unusual was the name. When I explained what Earth means. Cole looked at her. The word Earth scared them. I don't know if it's the word, Dana said. I think it might be what the word does when you run it through the archive. That was a distinction that took Cole a moment to process, because he was a man who thought in practical terms and the practical implication was the same either way. Something about the name had reached into the council's collective memory and touched something old. He asked Dana to find out what it was. She was already halfway to the door. Lily Farrow was sitting at the common room table with her paper notebook. She had not said anything during the conversation. She rarely said anything during conversations of this kind. She waited until Cole and Owen were looking at something else, then she opened the notebook to the page with the 2 underlined words and the 3rd word written beneath them. She read the 3rd word again. Then she closed the notebook, tucked it into her jacket, and went to find Dana. 4 corridors away, Sewell was sitting in his office trying to write a communication that he had rewritten 11 times. He was trying to explain, to his home government, what had happened on the station in the past 12 hours. He was finding it difficult. Not because he lacked the words. He had been a diplomat for 30 years and he had plenty of words. He was finding it difficult because he did not know, exactly, How to communicate the particular quality of the fear that was moving through the station. It was not a loud fear. That was the thing. Loud fears were easy to write about. They had events, causes, specific moments of crisis that could be identified and described. This fear was quiet. It was the kind of fear that arrived when you realized that something had always been true and you had simply never known it. The kind that settled into the stomach slowly, the way cold settles in, not a shock but a gradual and patient deepening. He deleted the message draft for the 12th time. He started again. Outside the station's observation windows, space continued to be exactly what it had always been. Immense and dark and full of distances that swallowed things whole. The stars did not move. The Solari system was out there somewhere behind the light of its own sun, ordinary-looking, peripheral, a small yellow star with 8 planets and one of them called, in the language of the things that had evolved on its third rock, by the name of the ground itself. Sewell thought about that. A species that had named their home after the most basic thing they could touch. He thought about what that said about how they saw their home. Not as something sacred. Not as something precious. As something ordinary. As the ground. As something you walked on without thinking about it. He shivered in all 4 of his arms. He started writing the message again. The message from the Council's diplomatic office arrived at 7 in the morning, station time. It was politely worded. It was always politely worded. It asked the United Earth delegation to attend a special clarifying session at 10 o'clock in the primary deliberation chamber. It specified that this was not a punitive proceeding. It specified this twice. Cole read the message and noted that a message which had to say it was not punitive, and said so twice, was almost certainly about something that felt punitive to the people who had written it. He told Dana and Owen and Lily. He told them to dress well and say less than they thought they needed to say. This was advice he had been giving for 25 years, and in his experience it was the only diplomatic advice that was always correct regardless of the species involved. They walked to the deliberation chamber at 9:50. The corridor was quiet. Not empty. Beings passed them, staff and delegates going about station business. But there was a quality to the way those beings passed, a small excess of direction, a slight increase in the angle of their gaze away from the human delegation, that Cole had felt before, in rooms and corridors before meetings that had weight to them. He kept his hands loose at his sides. He kept his face easy. He had been doing both of these things since he was 23 years old. The deliberation chamber was circular and high-ceilinged, built in the way that most things on Vethra platform were built, with the quiet confidence of something that expected to still be standing in 500 years. 5 representatives from the inner council were already seated when the humans arrived. Vrethkai stood at the front of the room near a display surface the size of a wall. Sewell sat in the translator seat, hands folded, the posture of someone holding themselves very still. Cole sat down. His delegation sat beside him. Lily had her notebook. Dana had her translation tablet. Owen had his hands in his pockets, which was his version of composure. Vrethkai began without ceremony. That was, Dana noted privately, a significant departure from the usual council procedure, which involved considerable ceremony. He spoke in his own language, which the room's translation system rendered in real time. He explained, first, what designation Solari 3 meant in the archive. He said it politely. A standard designation, a clean file, 11 years of unremarkable records. Cole nodded. This was not news. Then Vrethkai said the word Earth. He said it in English first, then asked the translation system to render it in 6 other languages currently spoken in the room, each time giving the etymological root. Ground. Soil. The material beneath. The archive search results appeared on the display wall as he spoke. 14 entries. The dates. The species. The expeditions that had gone silent. Cole watched the display. His face did not change. He was very good at this. Owen was watching the 5 inner council representatives instead of the display. He was cataloging the small signals, the slight tension in a set of shoulders, the way one delegate's secondary limbs had folded in close to the body, the way another had not blinked in some time. He filed these things without expression. Vrethkai moved to the second section of his presentation. The evolutionary record of Earth itself. Not the human diplomatic history, the planetary history. The geological record. The 5 mass extinction events, presented in clean chronological order. 96% of all marine species. 75% of all species. Event after event, each one a catastrophe large enough to have ended the story entirely, and in each case the story had not ended. Something had survived. Usually many things. They had filled the available space, diversified, grown complex, and then the next event had arrived and the process had begun again. The planet had done this 5 times. The display showed the scale of each event in a way that was easy to understand and very difficult to sit with. Dana found herself doing calculations that she had not intended to do. She put the tablet down on the table and looked at her hands instead. Vrethkai then showed the biosphere density data. The number of species. The predator distribution. The particular intensity of competition that had produced, over millions of years, the specific category of animal that humans were. An animal built by a world that had been trying to end itself for longer than most current civilizations had existed. He let the display sit for a moment. Then he said, and the species that came out of this history named it after the ground beneath their feet. The room was very quiet. Cole looked at Vrethkai. Vrethkai looked at Cole. There was a significant amount of information moving between them in that look without either of them saying anything. Cole said, "You're afraid of the name." It was not a question. Vrethkai said, "We are afraid of what the name reveals." He paused. He chose his words with the care of a being who had spent 3 centuries choosing words carefully, and this was still difficult. "Your species survived that world," he said. Survived it across 5 events of planetary scale destruction. And the species that came through all of that found it so ordinary, so unremarkable, that they named their home after the most common thing they could touch. He paused again. That is not the name of a species that was frightened by what they came from. That is the name of a species that did not notice. Cole thought about this. He was quiet for longer than most of the council representatives were comfortable with, which he did not know and would not have changed if he had. He looked at Dana. Dana was already thinking about the etymology. She had been thinking about it since Vrethkai said the word Earth in that context, in that room, with 14 archival entries on the wall behind him. She had a thing she wanted to say. She looked at Cole. He nodded once. She said, "We also have a second name for it. An older one." The room's attention shifted to her in the particular way that attention shifts when everyone in a room realizes something is about to happen. She said, "Terra." The translation system rendered it. 6 languages. 6 etymological roots. All meaning the same thing. The ground. The soil. The earth. The same word, in a different dead language. Humans had named their home twice, in 2 different ancient tongues, and both times arrived at the same answer. On a courtesy feed that connected to a ship currently in the process of leaving the station, the Pale Chorus, 11 hours into their return journey, received the translated word. They disconnected the feed. The deliberation chamber was very still. Sewell found himself looking at the floor, which he had not intended to do. He corrected it. One of the inner council representatives, a Velhari elder named Preth who had been in diplomatic service for 40 years, asked in a careful voice what the human delegation's response was to the archival record that had been presented. She was asking, in the diplomatic way, what humans planned to do with the knowledge that the galaxy had been quietly afraid of their home system for 60,000 years. Cole looked at her. He considered several answers. He said, "We didn't know." The room processed this. Owen said, from Cole's left, in a voice that was entirely conversational, "We genuinely did not know any of this. We named the planet after the ground because the ground was what we stood on. That's the whole reason." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Preth said, "That is perhaps the most alarming thing that has been said in this chamber today." Cole almost smiled. He was getting better at catching it before it arrived. Lily Farrow wrote 3 words in her notebook and underlined all 3 of them. She did not show anyone. The council did not expel the human delegation. Nobody said this directly. There was no vote, no formal motion, no official record of the option being considered and rejected. It simply did not come up, in the way that certain ideas do not come up in a room when everyone in the room has simultaneously decided, without coordinating, that raising that particular idea would be a mistake. Cole noticed the absence of it on the walk back from the deliberation chamber. He was good at noticing what was not said. He had learned that the empty spaces in a conversation were often where the actual information lived. He did not mention it to his delegation. He let it sit in his coat pocket like a stone, smooth and quiet, to be examined later. The following 3 days were interesting in the way that a fire is interesting when you are watching it from a safe distance and do not yet know how big it is going to get. For species formally requested extended buffer zones around the Solari system. The requests were submitted through official channels, correctly formatted, worded with the careful neutrality of species that had lawyers who were very good at their jobs. The buffer zone requests were not hostile documents. They were not accusations. They were the diplomatic equivalent of a being politely moving to the other side of the street when it saw something coming that it did not fully understand and did not want to be close to. Cole read each request and said nothing. Dana catalogued them. Owen put them in order of the distance each species' nearest fleet had already moved from the Solari system, which he had been tracking informally since the morning after the reception. When he showed the list to Cole, Cole looked at it for a long time and then handed it back without comment. 2 days after the deliberation chamber session, Sewell came to find Cole privately. He did not come to the delegation's official meeting room. He came to the small common area near the delegation's quarters, in the middle of the afternoon when foot traffic in the corridor was light. He had the manner of someone conducting a conversation they were not going to include in their official records. He sat across from Cole. He had tea that he had brought himself, which was a gesture Cole read correctly as this is not an official meeting, this is a person talking to another person. He said, "There are 2 species who would like to speak with you." Cole waited. Privately, Sewell said. "Not through council channels. They have asked me to make the introduction informally, so that there is no record of an initial request." Cole said, "Which species?" Sewell told him. One of them Cole recognized as the undret, the small large-eyed species from the outer rim, 3 feet tall, no military capability worth listing in any serious assessment. The other was a species called the Fenrath, who were not small and did have a military capability, but who had been spending the last century being compressed between 2 larger neighboring species whose ambitions had been expanding for years. Cole said, "What do they want to talk about?" Sewell looked at his tea. Then he looked at Cole. "They want to know," Sewell said, "whether humans protect things they consider worth protecting." Cole sat with that for a moment. He said, "Set up the meetings." The meeting with the undret happened first, the following morning. The undret representative was a being named something that rendered in English as a soft clicking sound, which Owen had privately decided to represent in his notes as Tick. Tick was 3 feet tall and had eyes that were large and dark and full of a very old kind of worry. Tick slid a document across the small meeting table. It was a non-aggression treaty, written in careful formal language, with a section at the end that listed the treaty's guarantors. The guarantor section had 1 line in it. It was blank, waiting for a name. Cole looked at the blank line. Owen looked at it. Cole picked up the offered pen, which was a physical pen on a physical piece of paper because the undret preferred things they could touch and keep. He signed his name on the guarantor line, with his title beneath it, and the date. Tick took the document back. Both of Tick's primary hands were holding it carefully, the way something is held when it has just become a thing that matters. Cole said, "You should know that this carries the weight of Earth's government only to the extent that I can bind Earth's government, which is a question you might want to research more thoroughly before feeling secure about this." Tick said, "We have researched your history." A pause. Tick said, "That is why we wanted your signature." Cole walked back to the delegation's quarters and told Owen that he might have just made a commitment that would require significantly more discussion with people back home. Owen said that sounded about right. The meeting with the Fenrath was different in tone but arrived at the same destination. The Fenrath wanted something more specific than a non-aggression treaty. They wanted a presence. Not a military base, not a fleet commitment, nothing that would constitute an act of aggression against their neighbors. Just a human diplomatic station on their nearest settled world. A building with a flag in it. An address. The Fenrath representative explained it without explaining it. He said that his people had learned, in the past several days, what the Galactic Council's archive contained regarding the human homeworld. He said that his people had also taken note of which species had been quietly repositioning their vessels. He said, "Those species know where your home is now. They know its history. They know what it produced. He paused. We would like them to also know that we know you. Cole understood this perfectly. A diplomatic station was not a weapon. It was something better than a weapon in certain situations. It was a visible association. A reminder, written in architecture, that somewhere on the other side of the galaxy there was a species whose home had been through 5 extinctions and had named itself after the ground, and those beings knew your name, and they had been inside your borders, and you had shared tea with them. He said he would bring the proposal to his government. On the last day before the delegation's scheduled departure, Lily Farrow went back to the archive access terminal that council staff had made available to the human delegation for the duration of their visit. She had a question she had been carrying in her jacket pocket since the first night, the night after the reception, written in her notebook beside 2 underlined words and a 3rd word below them. She typed in a search. She was looking for the Proto-Indo-European root of Earth. Not the Old English layer. Not the Proto-Germanic layer. The deepest layer she could find, the oldest version of the word before it became the word, when it was still close to whatever original sound a human being had made when pointing at the ground beneath them. The result came back. She read it. She read it again. The root, older than any language currently spoken, translated in the most literal available rendering as, the ground that remains. Not the ground that breaks. Not the ground that ends things. Not any of the names the other species had given it from the outside, looking in with fear. The ground that remains. The thing that was there before everything and would be thereafter. The surface that absorbed every impact and was still, at the end of all of it, simply the ground. She wrote the full translation in her notebook. The words sat on the page in her small, neat handwriting. She thought about showing it to Cole. She thought about sending it to Dana for the linguistic record. She thought about a lot of things she could do with a piece of information that, in the right room at the right time, would hit with the weight of something that had been true for 60,000 years without anyone noticing. She closed the notebook. She put it in her jacket pocket. She walked back to help Cole finish packing. Some things did not need to travel faster than light. Some things were enough just to know, to carry in a pocket, written in careful ink on paper, true and quiet and heavier than it looked. The galaxy was already afraid of the name. It did not also need to understand it. The delegation departed Vethra platform at 1400 hours, station time. The stars outside the transit window sat where they had always sat. Everywhere and patient and completely indifferent to the names that smaller things had given them. Earth was out there somewhere. Ordinary from a distance. Just another pale point of light, unremarkable in its position, circling an average star in a quiet arm of an average galaxy. The ground that remains. It always had been.